Hello, good morning, madam.
Hello, good morning, sir. So start करूया.
Okay, can we start?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first of all, good morning, everyone, um, and thank you for taking time to join. So what we are going to touch today is mainly the complete storage solution. Not complete, I would say, because there are still data warehouse, data lake, that part of the data engineering within Azure. But I'll cover some some basic about what is data warehouse and what is data lake and how you compare and when you choose when there is a scenario of taking those into account, whether you have structured or unstructured sort of scenario. So as you know that storage, probably I mean, since we are like almost 10 years back then, we still um, had a hard disk, I mean, some sort of USB sticks where we're carrying the data from one end to another, if small files like 1 GB, 2 GB, etc. So storage is not new to us. We know how to store the data, how to move the data from here and there if needed. But if you look at today, um, data is everything, right? Not only data, everything, but data, there are new words in the organization. Data is a new oil, data is a new currency, data is new gold. So everything you count on data is like the fundamental parameter of every organization. And I think this data, capturing our data is not new actually, but obviously uh, in the IT industry, it seems like it has become a big word, buzzword, but also organization has realized that they really need to have the data. Otherwise, if they don't have data and they're not using that data in an appropriate fashion, they sooner or later they will be phased out from the industry. So there are huge competition out there who will either kill their business or grab their customers and make them bankrupt at the end of the day. So keeping that in mind, let's work on storage. Storage means obviously the data needs to store somewhere, and we will see what are the options Azure offers and which option you need to choose when really you need to store your data, because you cannot just blindly copy data to whichever available storage option. No, that's not the mint of the option to store. There are a couple of meaning full options. I'll walk you through, then you understand which data needs to store where and what is the cost is going to be associated with it. Because at the end of the day, everything is you have to bear the cost in mind. Nothing is free in this world. So you have to aware that data. I mean, even if you look at now, right? If your Gmail's account, if it is like 80, 90% full, they start sending message that you upgrade to Gmail and buy this 100 GB extra with X amount of money. That means the Google store or Apple store or maybe some other store, they recommend you to put your data in the cloud and pay monthly cost or yearly subscription, whatever they get offered. Because data is increasing, we are not deleting the emails every single day. Even if there are hundreds of crappy emails coming in, we do not have time to go back and remove, right? And even if you remove it, it's still stays into recycle bin, and you do not even have time to go there and delete it because this data is still there in the archive fashion. So my point is, the data is very important, and organization needs to stand today, not tomorrow. If they do, probably they will be phased out, as I said. So, what is if you look at the Forbes? Actually, I was looking like what are the statistics of the Forbes. Majority of the time, you look at Forbes or McKinsey or BCG reports, because those are the organization who really go to the customer, try to understand what's happening in the industry in the different verticals, maybe manufacturing, retail, banking, etc. And they make statistics saying that how many organizations are really standing into that new era of cloud computing or new era of data movement? Are they really using the existing data on prem, or they're really trying to push the data to the cloud? It is really important. So if you look at this, then these figures is not my own figures. That's the reason I put the source. If you go to Forbes, you will see these numbers as well. So, and this number keep increasing, decreasing, depends on how many customers have moved, depends on their statistics also. Once the statistics done and they really want to publish the reports, they just publish, and then we as a subscribers or viewers or readers, we have an opportunity to look at that data. So if you look at 80% of the data is valuable to the organization. And actually, if you look at, data is a key for everything. Having more data helps you to make sustainable decisions. What does mean by sustainable? Because you're not making mistakes while taking decision, because either you do not have the data in hand, or maybe you are doing too much assumptions, and that assumption is not good. If you look at the courts, right, judge knows in the first place that whether the accused is guilty or not guilty. Just an example. But he cannot take the decision in the first place, although he is running the cases every single day. Maybe if you go to High Court in Mumbai, then every judge has like maybe 20 to 30 cases a day. Maybe that runs 5 10 minutes, or maybe sometimes they have 50 cases in a day. And what is my point I would like to mention is, even if they know the the result in the first place, what they look from the two parties, two lawyers, is who has more evidence, who has more data, so that he can take, um, let's say, he can just bring the justice. Let's put that way. And the justice means giving the right decision for the right party, who has committed the crime, who has committed something horrible things. And that is the reason it is very important that data should be in the hand, right? And if you look at, even now, 47% of the companies are still in the fear mode, right? Because because their competitions are taking the steps early in their journey, and they start with data itself, rather than the old companies are thinking, hey, first, if I have to move, what about my existing data? What about my existing systems? Will they work with the amount of data we are trying to capture? If not, do we have an investment where we can put the investment by new database product? That might not happen, right? And it's all about decision making from the top, not the bottom. Top in the sense the CEO, CFO, and the CTO, CIO, whoever it is running the show, they must have the budget to invest, not only invest in the product and services, but also invest in the knowledge of the people. Because the people who has knowledge, maybe engineers and architect, who really working day in and day out, transitioning from legacy system to the new system, they really need to have the knowledge. They really need to know how I can transform and transition existing environment to the new environment. And and if you look at now another statistics from how Forbes itself is, 80% of organizations are not ready. I mean, that number can vary, depends on the statistics and new reports. But if you look at even 80%, it's a huge number, right? Even 20, if you look at 20% even ready, in my opinion, because you do not know what happened yesterday. Some companies might have already taken decision, and they might decide like, hey, 1st of January, we are going ourselves in a data company. But my point is, 80%, if we consider today, is a big number that not everybody is ready to move into that transition. Any question, please do ask questions. If feel free if I walk through the slides or walk through any sort of whiteboarding. And like data is not only coming in one form. There are data comes in multiple forms. We know, probably if you guys are from computer or IT, they know. If not, then I'll walk you through. The data is in different form. The data is unstructured. The data is structured. That some data is semi-structured. It's combination of unstructured and structured. And we are capturing files every single day, right? Like whether it's movies, PDFs, MP3s, JPGs, etc., etc. All those files, but they're unstructured because they are text. They have no basically. Let's put that way in a way that you understand the it's a text heavy information. Let's put that way. If PDF means what we do, we basically either we take word file, convert it into PDF. Obviously, the size will reduce, but also nobody can modify it; just they can read it. Um, that means it is a text heavy information that not organized in a clearly defined framework or model, right? But and that those are, as I mentioned, there are media, post, emails, maybe online reviews. There are n number of examples: videos, images, speech, sounds, name it, right? Whatever it comes in an unstructured data, and that size may varies, right? A PDF file can be from 100 KB to sometimes 1 GB. Depends on how many pages you are capturing into that PDF itself. Just an example. Same like movies. But if you look at semi-structure, a semi-structure, as I said, it's maybe a JSON file or XML or anything, which is loosely organized into categories using some meta tags, right? Because if you know the metadata we collect and some of the forms, we can see that hey, if there is somebody is doing tweets right now, that Twitter is very important, very how to say that, very important social media tool where people tweets or tweets organized by some hashtag. Because if you go to LinkedIn even, people say hashtag Microsoft X or Google or etc. People are used to have the hashtag, and that is nothing but a semi-structured data, maybe folder organized by different topics that might come under semi-structure also. And we are used to having structured data. I mean, structured data is not new. Every database, I mean, the SQL based database, let's put it structured query language or unstructured, like no SQL, no SQL, we used to know. But when the SQL or Oracle, any relational database, relational in the sense that is the relation between uh, two parameters like rows and columns. So one rows, let's say Amar Kalvikatti is a person, and his all the attributes like his address, telephone number, credit card number, etc. that comes in a column, and Amar is in the row. So that is a structured sort of things, which often are numbers or labels, or sometimes you stored in a structured framework of columns and rows. And mostly, if you look at SQL, Oracle database, where they want to keep the customer data inside those databases, they're related to preset parameters. Preset means, as I said, if credit card information needs to be stored, you know what credit card holds actually. Your name, your credit card number, the expiry date, and behind the scene there is a three-digit code, which they really want to know where the if the you if you have done the transaction and if you don't make the payment, where they should be you should be charged. So there are in like numerical data. We are doing the Google Sheets every single day, right? Online Google Sheets. Those are and putting the numerical data. That might be another example. People used to give some star ratings. That also part of the structured database. There are so many examples which we can give, and this is important because data is in three forms only. It it comes any form, and you will see that into when I create a storage account within Azure. You will see blob storage, which is unstructured data, unstructured, how to say, data where you can store. When I say structured means there are all the databases, which maybe SQL, Oracle, maybe some other databases from, let's say, Nutanix has their own database. There are whichever is a relational database, that becomes structured and you can keep the data. When I say semi-structured, that means any loosely organization categories it comes or metadata. I'll come to some of the example later. But please do ask me if you're not clear on any of the slides. if you know that this data we used to before the database came or any, I mean, it's not now, but when I started my journey, database was there. But even companies used to store data in two different forms, right? Either we used to have the hard disk, even we still have the hard disk to our laptops. Some laptops which are expensive, they have SSD drives, and SDD is nothing but hard disk drive, and SSD is solid state drives. So, and what is the difference between, and why they use nowadays more SSD than HDDs? If you look at HDDs, probably you might have carried. They're bulky, right? They're bulky. They're very slow, because if you look at it, there is a spindle which try to read and write, but that takes time. It is slower, but also it is cheaper, right? Because you buy for cheap price for a big amount of data, but then you have to bear something as a drawback. It is cheap, it is slower, because that has a mechanical moving parts, which I just showed the spindle, and it is fragile, right? But the best for storing extra data, such as movies, photos, or document, we have enough space to put into hard disk, and we can wait for it, because what we need SDDs is keeping so backing up our data in case my laptop gets failed or my system is unavailable. Where should I recover my data, right? So we used to have the hard disk or SDDs where we can recover our data. The same thing, people say, hey, you know what, I hard disk is bulky, it's not easy to carry, but also um, also if even if I'm using my own server or own laptop or anything, I really want SSD based, because those are small, that comes in let's say sort of motherboard, but it is like faster. The important thing is I need speed. I need, if you look at even caching, whenever you want to cache something, generally people use SSD drives, because caching means the speed is fast. If I go to the google.com on the browser, first time it takes time, but after 10 minutes, if I go to the same page, it takes from the cache. You, because it doesn't go and make a request to Google and come back. It already made a request, and basically you reuse the cache information, and the Google page will open very fastly. And that is where SSD drives behind the scene is used. And they're the flash, because they don't have the mechanical spindle, they have the flash actually inside. If you look as non-flash memory, because they have the flash inside. And if you want to use SSD, it's best for storing like operating systems, because you can imagine every time if I do any action here on browser or something, it goes to the operating system, because the first and foremost interface for any tool on my laptop, it first interact to the operating system, and that operating system is very close to my all the tools within my desktop. That means it stores basically it based for storing the operating systems. Sometimes, if you can imagine the gaming applications, right? And gaming application is so popular. As I said, kids are really on the games, and they what they want is speed, because they're doing playing the games within a group, and the group might sit everywhere, maybe not next to each other, but one is sitting in Pune and another sitting in Mumbai, and they, the friends or families, they want to play the game together, and they want to play and hit something faster, or maybe a racing car game, and they want to say, hey, I want to win and you want to lose, and something like that. So that those kind of things are really important. So what is important is frequently used files. When you want to use frequently used files or frequently used games, SSD is the best option actually. And it's not only SSD is best option for that, but for example, if you're booting up your operating system, like sometimes you do restart or boot, you do not want to wait. For example, it is a server, and the server is serving request to the, let's say, banking server requesting a request to the end user who's doing transaction. But somehow I need to patch new security patch, because if it is Oracle database, and I said, hey, the Oracle said you have to update this new patch, because there are some vulnerabilities covered by this patch. but once you apply the patch, you have to reboot. How quickly you reboot and bring that server back, it's only possible if you have the SSD drives, because the booting up your operating system is much faster. If you look at, as I told you like many times, the video game, loading video games, SSD is very powerful. If somebody wants to do even importing or exporting any files, SSD is another best option to choose. So, but like I said, this is also important. If this is, maybe you think, hey Amar, this is not part of the Azure, but they are part of, because if you choose any sort of SSD solution, whether premium or non or standard, you will come. You have to pay for that, because it is, as I said, it's faster. It is um, more expensive, but importantly, they solve the purpose of your organization, or helping customers to have faster performance. And that is where majority of the organizations are exploring into and investing more into SSDs um, hard disk drives basically. If you look at if you look at the core of Azure services, of course we're going to talk about storage today, because as I said, blob, queues, files, disk, etc. And disk, these are the disk actually. If you look at, these are hard disk and SSDs, these are the disk. But I wanted to take this before I move to this, because the disk into Azure is bit of manage and manage in sense. But I just wanted to realize, like in the past and even today, we're still carrying forward the legacy stuff. Any question on this before I move to Azure journey, or I'm super clear? Ma'am, I'm not looking to any chat messages, but if you have, just read for me so that I can answer them. Um, no question, right? I take it as a no. So let's focus on Azure. As you know, Microsoft Azure is huge. I mean, not only Microsoft Azure, but if you look at AWS and Google and any other cloud providers, they're adding new services. They're adding new services because customer is requesting. Because if they really, for example, if they want to add import export sort of, just an example, tool, it costs them a lot, because first the requirement gathering needs to be done. They need to see, hey, even if I have requirement gathering from a customer, are the bunch of customers are really going to invest in that product if I basically make that product available on my portal or on my cloud environment. If they're not generating revenue on top of it, that will be the less priority work for them to focus on. I was part of aviatrix before joining Microsoft, and I was part of the product management team, okay, based out of California. And I used to fly every month to California to basically take all the requirements, all the customers I'm talking with in EMEA and APAC market. And then what I used to understand from the customers is they have bunch of requirements, and the tool and the services which you have created, that covers 50% of the scenario, but not 100%, because there is nothing 100% in the world. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect in my opinion. We are 80% good, 20% always room for improvement. So taking improvement into an account, they also try to collect the requirements, and the requirements are not the technical requirements. The requirements may be integration requirement, because if I create some tool, is that going to integrate with my legacy platform? Is that going to integrate with my other third party tools? Maybe third party cloud. Maybe if Azure can interact with AWS and maybe some other third party tools which we are using as an interface. So all sort of integration testing, as well as bringing the value plus the cost, because if the competitor brings the same feature and functionality which is more cheaper than you, they will not buy from you, right? They will buy the solutions from someone else. So how you make that cost effective solution but also effective, where customer can buy and purchase immediately. So that means Azure, just now we focus on Azure. Azure is huge, right? Microsoft is huge. If you look at this, this is one snapshot. Behind the scene, there are hundreds of other services that nobody knows every single day, but also unless and until you're not using it, you only know them on a high level, but on a configuration part, you only come and you started using when the customer use case you start building actually. And there are so many services that it is sometimes hard to determine which one you should use when you need it. And this is also true when it comes to storing your data in Azure. Because since we are talking about storage, we need to look at like how, which file or which video or maybe which schema I should basically locate into, which is the tool, whether blob storage or disk or file or queues, you should know when you map to your solution. There are many different services in Azure that you can use to store data, but in reality, you need to see that hey, there are a bunch of options, and I really need to choose the storage which fits to my use case. If you need to store files or small rows of data at a large scale without advanced query, for example, then you can immediately make a guess that Azure Storage is your best bet. And then Azure Storage is, as I said, it comes in a different flavors, blob, queues. Let me go through the next slide. So if you look at, there's a concept called Azure Storage Account. A storage account is nothing but, if you create a storage account, let me just show you. There are blobs, tables, files, queues, and this. But if I go back to my portal, and if I go to my home page, and if I look at, I have created storage account in the past, uh, and if you look at here, I have created somewhere in August. But if you look at, if you create a storage account, then behind the scene, as I mentioned here, once you create a storage account, behind the scene, it already provisioned. Of course, it is not in use, but provisioned for five different flavors: Bob, table, file, queues. And if you look at here, you will see the same. Containers is blob storage, files, queues, tables, right? Disk, I will come to know later because the disk is part of operating virtual machine which needs to store in the disk. But I'll come to know that is manage and manage, etc. But in reality, the storage account comes with the flavor. This disk moved actually by Azure to specific to the virtual machines. But if you look at blob storage, um, because if you look at Microsoft, obviously you can access via REST API, but virtual machines, I'll come to the files and disk because this mainly used for virtual machines or any container you're using. You need to have the file or disk storage. But the rest, you really need, if it is a REST API. REST API means if I want to keep my files from my laptop to the blob storage on the internet because I want to create a static website, that is called a REST API, and where the REST API you store and basically make your website available. That is how the function works basically. But just to give you more insight about these flavors of uh, storage in question, I just see the pop-up. Yeah. Um, See, I will come to you will understand when you say Bob audio video queue. I'll come to know. And once you go walk through the slides, your answer, a question will be answered. So if you look at blob, because Azure storage consists of multiple services that are each optimized for certain usage in different scenarios. They are described in different fashion. If you go out and start using. But if you look at the blob storage, which I said, it is mainly used for unstructured data and just Wiki sir, I think he mentioned video, audio files. They comes into blob, and they mainly useful for storing files, small or large, maybe audio, video files, etc. Because that is part of unstructured data. When just to answer the question on you first before to walk into table queue, the queue meant for storing small messages that are picked up by other applications. For example, if queues storage can help to decouple your application. So, for example, I think 1 minute of this slide. Whenever there is a decoupling comes, queues comes in picture, and the queue storage, as you know, that if there is a manufacturing stuff, there are some serial items where it has to come in a queue, and then you really need to know like how that. But or maybe, for example, if you look at some ETL process, or even you do data capturing, and that needs to go one by one behind the scene, because the first if the first item is over, the second needs to be there, but they come in a queue, and then basically that queue needs to be served, because it has to be happen in that fashion serially, or in any other retail solutions where you really need to look at like how you do different processing, let's say payment processing or some other. It has to come via the separate queue, and the queue is nothing but, as I said, is for the decoupling things, because a system is attached to multiple applications, and that has to be done with requesting and pulling the information in a different queues. I hope that answer your question. But as I said, the queues are mainly meant for storing small messages that are picked up by other applications. If it is not clear, I can go in a whiteboard, but these are the simple scenarios. If you look at the file, I'm sure you are used to have the one common folder. Maybe in your colleges there are departments, they are putting file and allow you access. Sorry, putting some file or putting some exam paper or something. Now everything is, people are doing WhatsApp, that they make group and put in WhatsApp. But if not, but still companies or colleges or maybe organizations, they're not putting on WhatsApp because that's external media. I do not want to share my information on internet, where they can make or break my organization if they they think this information should I forward and make your college name bad. So your sensitive data should not be on the internet or social media. Then how you internally transfer that data on the in network, because file is a network based, right? Maybe let me do a small walkthrough on a whiteboard. Um, so if you look at, as I mentioned, um, if you look at a virtual machine or an application, virtual machine is nothing but an application, because uh, application sitting on top of the virtual machine, and that has always a disk attached, or SSDs, for example, because the read write, or generally we call IOPS, input output performance, etc. So you need to be sure that the IOPS read write, continuous read write, should happen locally. because your VM is here. Unless assume that you have uh, blob storage, you do not want to go over the multiple hops within Azure and come back. You write something here, or maybe read something from the sorry, write something from here and read something from there, and then a user who's trying to go to that application, he has to wait for a couple of seconds or minutes. That's not the way you want to offer as a service. You want to offer a service which is speed and highly performant. So that's the reason local storage is very important. But if you look at application A, application B, or maybe a user on this application and a user on this application, they want to share a common file or a folder they want to share, and they said, "Hey, I want to keep the few things here. I want to keep few things here, and maybe tomorrow, if the third person wants to take that same data because the dependency of application A and B on C, what they do is basically take that file over the network, and that's the reason they call NFS protocol, network file share. So that file is based on the network, not on sitting in the hard disk and etc. It is a network based file share. That's what they call NFS. And probably like we used to have the folders. For example, if I go to the folder and let's say I'm creating a folder here, or maybe let's say one second. So if I'm creating let's say folder and then I'm giving folder recipe. What you do generally, you either use that folder, right? You map that folder and you share that folder to network drive, because in the network everyone can see, hey, Amara shared the ACP folder, and in the folder there are files which I can go, but I have to be on the same network. I should not be outside the network, because maybe on the firewall, or maybe some other blockages here and there that might not allow you to copy that file, or go to that even folder link, etc. So that is how we used to do, right? And my point is not about just that particular two sort of storage stuff like blob or file storage or SSDs, but there are also tables. And tables, let me walk you to the slides again. And the tables are mainly for key value pair. It's not about anything, because um, probably I will show you, when you create a virtual machine or you're creating anything, you have to put the tags in it, and the tags comes with a key value pair. I have something here. Let me walk you through what is meant by table and where the table basically the metadata is stored in the table. So, for example, if you go back to creating a virtual machine, you go next, next. Let me come to the tag actually directly. So, if you look at in the tag, you see the key value pair. So the name and the value, etc. The name is nothing but a key, and you can put n number of uh, names and values for the same virtual machine. Maybe this is for the department. Maybe you can say should be used anything. Any information you need to tag to here, and then this data of name and value, which is key pair value. This data is stored in table section. Just for your information. And if you look at, you're not only creating virtual machine, you are creating bunch of different things. Wherever it is possible, they 99.9% you have to. Generally we recommend 100% to add tax, because when you want to see the pricing at the end of the day, when the bill generates how much consumption you made in Azure, it is easy for you that which machine or who. For example, if you put name and American Wicket Day, maybe department IT. If those parameters if you add, then exactly know that hey, this machine belongs to Amar from the IT department, and he consume more money than anybody. So those kind of things is really useful. But that data of this key value pair is stored in the tables actually. Okay. As I said, this blob, queue, and table, they are accessible over various API. And the file and disk, which I just showed about the whiteboard, is mainly used for virtual machines. Now, if you look at the storage, some of the features and why storage is Azure storage is more valuable. That durable. Durable means if once, and you will understand with the LRS, ZRS, those kind of concept. The durable means like if one fails, you still have another available, and there is a durability. Generally, now they say 11, 11 nines durable, which is highly durable, highly available. Um, Whenever you possible, you even the failure scenario, you still can move from one region to another, and you grab your data, because either it can be synchronously copying and asynchronously copying and storing the data. It is secure because there are some encryption which I'll walk you through, and that encryption will keep. And there are secure means there is an encryption attached. That means either the encryption at rest, that means within Azure, within next to the virtual machine, and and um, in the transit mean if you are connecting your Azure environment to the on-prem, there's a VPN, right? VPN is nothing but we put encryption on top of it. That means the traffic will be encrypted between your data center and the cloud data center, or maybe cloud. That is called um, encryption at transit versus encryption within your cloud environment. Like disk is encrypted, that is basically encryption at rest. Then scalable. Scalable means what? If you really want to build your storage account, you can build across the globe, right? There is nothing, right? Nobody's going to stop, because the moment you have different regions, then you have an option. For example, a storage account. If you want to create storage account, you see like I'm creating storage account now in US, and maybe I can create the storage accounts across the globe within couple of minutes. That means there is a scale where I can build that storage account across the globe within couple of minutes. So there is no way you can stop that scale. It is cost effective because purchasing the hardware on prem, managing it, having the knowledge, plus if something is failed, the hardware is to be again reprocured from the vendor. It takes time, and that takes time means it takes more money. But cloud itself is like cheaper, and there are a couple of tires: hot tire, cool tire, archive. Those will make even cost reduced when you move data from one tire to another. I'll walk you through. Plus, they're easily accessible as they are present across the globe. If the data is stored in US and tomorrow the US region is unavailable, your data replicate to another region, you can just take it easily, right? So they're easily accessible from other region. Of course, there when I talk about this blob has some different types. This is blob. So generally, what happens? Block is nothing but if you know that um, the blocks is different size. If you just take an example of operating system, I'm sure since you are in part of IT and computer science department, you know that my operating system comes in two blocks. Any guesses? If not, I'll tell you, like it comes in 32 bit or 62 bit. because those are two different blocks of operating systems. That if you really want to keep the backup of operating system, generally it used to store in blob storage because it's unscalable database. It is basically managed service. You don't need to manage that. Everything is there. Plus, it is access over the internet without a problem because it's a public service. But also you can use it internally with endpoints. Obviously, there are some append blobs. I am basically ideal for logs. If you want to keep the logs, you can keep it there. Page blobs, as I said, VM disk or database. You basically have random read writes, which I already told via the whiteboard. So those are the things you basically take into account. And as I said, this page storage is basically for the disk storage because your disk, which is attached to the VM, and you want to keep the backup, you can put to the page blob actually. Blob access comes in a different flavor. Sorry, has a tire, cool, hot, and archive. But actually, that varies with two terms: storage and transaction. What is mean that you store the data in hot tier, cool tier, or archive tier. But I'll walk you through the next slide. What does those mean? If you store, it costs money. But if you want to fetch that data sooner or later, that transaction also cost money. Let's say I keep the file today in, let's say, archival mode. Now, of course, that cost me minimal because it is an archive state because I am hardly going to use it. But let's assume that I want to retrieve that file. It takes time. That takes time also takes more money because you might have know like there is a in India. Let's come back to the courts. Indian courts generally, and maybe somebody has an experience or not. Since I have done my law study, it's easy also for like how easy you can retrieve the evidence if you have some banking related disputes or some other dispute and or maybe land dispute going to the tahsildar or getting the sadbara uttara etc and getting the copy, and even if they have the copy you store somewhere and they store somewhere because nobody came in, that old structure is there and you need to retrieve that data. They have to wait for days. Even if a court requests banks to give the bank statement and find bank statement, because the data is stored, let's say your transaction of 20 years has been stored in the bank and they need to retrieve the 20 years data back, that takes time because it is in archival state. You need to retrieve that data and it will take time because first need to find where exactly which repository they have saved and they need to retrieve the data. It takes time, but also it costs money. So that they both goes in the reverse manner. If the storage cost is more, transaction cost is less. If the storage cost is less, especially into the archive bucket, the retrieval cost or transaction cost is higher. So they go opposite to each other. So let's walk you through what does that mean. Let's go to the hot tier. So hot tier is nothing but what? Is nothing but a frequently asked. So if you look at the virtual machine which are disk, basically they access frequently, frequently read write access, and that read write access is continuous process, very frequent. Not like hey, I read now, I write now, and I read after a month. No, that's not the possible. It is a continuous process, and that's the reason that has a higher storage cost, but lower data access because you're not accessing after months, you're continuously accessing it. So the storage which you're putting writing continuously, that costs more. And as I said, the storage and transaction that goes in reverse manner. So if you put higher storage cost, the lower will be the transaction cost or access that particular data. If you move, generally what happens, the hot tire is for continuous read write, cool is for low storage um, because you are moving from hot to cool, and that cool data is generally not used every day month. I think there is a table, you if you look at here, the minimum storage duration for cool is 30 days. So it is not an immediate. You can basically have that 30 days of period, or maybe later more than 30 days. And in the same of archival, it goes 80, 180 days. But archival meaning whatever data you have and you want to keep not using it, but you want to store somewhere, because banking regulation, just for your information, if you're working in a bank, every data needs to store minimum for 7 years. After 7 years, you can phase out the data, or you can still keep in archival. Because as I said, if there is a dispute and bank is requesting to the banks, sorry, court is requesting to the banks that I really need the data to see what happens in my particular transaction. Right? There's a guy called Modi who was an IPL. They had some money robbing, and there's another guy, Nirav Modi, who has Punjab National Bank, some fraud actually here and there, and they want to see how much money and transaction happened. That data needs to be accessed by bank and provided to the court, so that court knows exactly how much money went into his bank account. So all those things are really important. Huh? I mean, it's not only just keeping the data, but also you never know what will happen later with that data, or maybe transaction. It is banking or some other sort of customers where your data is so important. Um, and as I said, you move the life cycle. Hot data move to the cool, cool will move to after 30 days. You move to the cool, cool you move to the archive tab. And if you look at the table itself, this table you will also find it from Microsoft website. But if you look at hot tier, cool tier, obviously availability is always there. There is nothing 100% the world, but always 99.909. The important thing is when you want to get that data, it is either GRS, geo redundancy. But if you look at whenever you want to fetch that data, what is the minimum storage duration you can put basically? Cool tire always 30 days or longer, and archive minimum 180 days, because this hot tire doesn't come with the days because it is frequent access, right? And that you see the millimeter latency is very low compared to the archive, because it is in house, because you are um, not using it every single day because it was archive data. Any question on this before I move further? And this hot cool tire is not only one, Mr. Rob. If you look at the file storage, it comes with that also. If I go to the file, for example, let's say file storage, sorry, storage account, and then use this one. If I go to the file and I create a new file, for example, you see here, it comes with transaction optimize hot and cool. So it is not only just to the blob, but also in the file terms. Of course, there is a file, there is no archival, but it comes in different flavors. Um, Back to the slides. One step further. Now we talked about this data and how you can store the data in hot, cool, depends on whether it's frequent access or infrequent access, because cool is infrequent access basically. You're not accessing frequently, you access within that 30 days or within a month, etc. Once in a month, let's put that way. 30 days is once in a month. That means infrequent access versus this is frequent access. And this archival is like after 130, which like once in a quarter. 130 days is nothing but 6 months, sorry, 6 months. Like every 6 months means twice a year you just access that data. So how frequently, infrequently you access data, based on that there are cool tiers are defined, and the cost is associated along with it. And that cost comes, as I said to you, in two terms: storage cost and transaction cost. Look at storage cost is higher for hot tier because you're putting data, but and retrieving very easy. But here you're not putting data every day. Once you put the data, it will be there. But if you want to face the data, the transaction cost is higher, and then it gradually changes that. This is medium, like storage cost lower, but the higher the data access cost because you access once in a month. Now, storage replication. So let me first draw something before I go to LRS, locally redundant storage, zone redundant, or you might have know that zone redundant or locally redundant. Let me go to that. If you look at this drawing, actually, right? If you look at this drawing, I have mentioned, I think, day one or day two, where if you have the availability zone, there are three data centers, or maybe there are three racks, depends on whoever is a part of three racks in three data center, of course, where your server is residing or your system is residing. Whenever you make a copy, three copies will be stored locally, right? Three copies will be stored locally, and if you have multiple zones to be utilized, you add additional three copies there, right? So exactly what my point is. Um, Let me come back here. Exactly my point is, if you look at here, whether locally redundant or zone or geo redundant. So if you look at, you replicate your data three times within a single physical location synchronously in primary region. That means whichever region, let's say Mumbai region, if you're taking into account, that replication happens. That means whatever data you are replicating, the three copies will be saved in the local, basically physical location. If you go to the zone, which I just mentioned, couple of zones, the replicator data three times in that zone synchronously within primary. That means if you are using two different zones, six copies will be stored. Three on one zone, three in another zone. If you have geo redundant, that means one geography, let's say one region in Mumbai, and I'm sitting in Amsterdam. There is a EU West, which is an Amsterdam region. You replicate your data into secondary region. Secondary means my Amsterdam region. That means if you look at the redundancy level, it is low when you are locally, because it's redundancy is low because if that particular data center is broken, you have no redundancy to, basically there is no redundancy to capture data. If one zone fail, you still have another zone because you kept three copies here in one zone and three copies in another zone. So there's a moderate chance that you can get redundancy. But if your geo redundancy high, because how likely if there's a big flood in Mumbai, because we are next to the this Arabic Sea, that same flood will not come to Amsterdam. Maybe it will come after months or something if the water is continuously flowing. Who knows, right? So that's the reason the redundancy gets increased. The way the distance is getting increased, or the way you're putting in a different or distance-based data centers. But obviously, if you look at the cost, the cost increasing because lower means it provides least expensive solution because you're putting three copies in the same data center or single physical location versus you're putting six copies. That means this price multiplies here. And if you look at regions, you also have to replicate the cost. Also need to bear in mind the cost in the sense, for example, let me go to the whiteboard. If nothing is clear, please raise your hand, because this is very important topic also when you want to learn Azure. For example, if you look at, let's assume that this is my Amsterdam region, EU West, Amsterdam, AMS, and you are in Mumbai. Come on, you are in Mumbai. And let's assume that there are two zones or whatever it is, zone one, zone two, AC1, AC2, sorry. Same way here, just an example. And even a replicate. If I write, sorry, within a virtual machine or any application, if I want to write it here, I put three copies here, three copies here. Right? That is more local to my region, Mumbai region. But when I write, I want synchronously the same write will happen here. But that is over the net Microsoft Azure network, correct? Of course, you have to pay the cost of the network utilized. When you see the pricing calculator, the data goes out costs more than data coming in. Obviously, there is a prices for in and out data of over the network because this fiber they're not built for free. Yeah? You still have to pay for the fiber they have built and the data you're carrying over the ocean or over any sort of geographies. You pay the data going in and out, and you go to the calculator and what and see later when I'm telling this truth. That means plus this is my second data center, this is my primary data center. If you really want to keep, because your end users are here, I don't want to use this data center here because even if my this data center is again came up or let's say my region is came up out of the flood after a month or something, I want this user to access locally because the round trip latency. Because if you look at maybe if you look at here, this user to reach to that particular file or an application or data to access, it takes 1 minute to reach and 1 minute to back. So can he wait 2 minutes? Versus here locally, it goes for let's say 10 second and 10-second come back. Just an example. He can wait for 20 seconds versus 2 minutes. It's a long period. That means the performance to the user within your territory is much faster than going over the different fibers. And that is this is geo redundant versus zones. This is zone redundant because you are keeping the three copies here, three copies here. And when it is only one data center, you are only keeping three copies here. If you're not using zone based LRS, they call LRS locally redundant storage. But you need to understand. Um, just a second. Now my mother is calling. I will say to her, "Hello, I hello, hello." I think she mistakenly pressed the button. Apologize. Um, okay, back to the whiteboard. So these are the three different flavors you put your data. So let me go back to the slide again. Now you understand like what is LRS, ZRS, and um, GRS. And just a second, let's see. She's calling again. I think something important. Just give me a second. Sorry, ma'am. Um, she wanted to give one quick message. Apologize again. Okay, so now if you look back to the slide, um, obviously, as I said, if you keep locally, it costs less, but it is less redundant because if the local physical data center is broken, you have no other copies to retrieve. But in the zone, you are adding additional redundancy. If one zone fails, you still have data present, you can retrieve. And that same goes to the geo redundance. And then cost varies, right? Cost varies. The time of let's say getting the data is very easy, because if you look at some of the other parameters available, if the entire data center went down, because here no availability, because there's we're putting into one data center. Here yes, because you're putting into different data centers, different availability zones. The same goes here, same for regions, because in GRS only keeping the region, other rest in the same region. So that's the reason. So these are the things which I already explained anyway. So the availability and the cost that goes in a reverse manner. The more available you want the data, the more cost you have to bear in account. And the replication or redundancy is important because data is very critical to your organization. You need data anyhow. You need transaction anyhow. If anyone requests, or anyone, if my user comes to bank and he said, ma'am, I want 30 days bank account statement because I'm taking home loan, or taking car loan, and they're asking me to give, if you cannot download, for example. And now you can download because everything is net banking. But previously we used to go to the bank to give the credit statement. But my point is, your data needs to be easily accessible to the end user, because you do not want that bank user to go empty-handed. You will say, hey, you know what, I should change my bank account because they're not helping me whenever I need something. But if I go to some other bank, they will make it very quicker. So customer also losing if you lose that trust, if you lose that kind of information to be provided immediately. Any question before I move to other topic? Story is important, and hope you are understanding what I'm telling. Um, Now we have touch upon blob storage and some of the storage terminologies, like how the replication happen, what is the different techniques within replication, which one I should consider when I'm designing, whether my customer only stays in Mumbai region or India region, because it's an Indian customer. They have nothing across the globe. I take one region, but when I'm configuring and designing that particular customer environment, I should consider ZRS. Of course, GRS doesn't come because they don't have two regions. I don't want to give the LRS because they said high redundancy is one of the requirement. When you capture technical requirement, you also ask the question, and you have to ask the question in multiple ways actually, because their data is very important, right? And their data is important, meaning they can they can ask anytime. There is no guarantee. There is uncertainty that they can come to you. By the way, I did not discuss another terminology called G Jhadaris. There is another terminology G Jhadaris, but generally it's there's a chance of 1% using by organization. So Jhadaris is G Jhadaris is nothing but um, Geo, because this is also Geo, zone redundant storage, because this is geo redundant, but geo zone redundant, and that is basically an intermediate option you can use protecting your any data center level failure, and that recommended for only not highly availability, but also critical data scenarios, because these two terms, JDRS, GRS, also included into GZRS, because in Geo there's also zone redundant, but generally that is less likely utilized. That's the reason I did not put the fourth one. But for your knowledge is good to know. Any question in between before I move? Please do ask questions, because for me it's easy when I whiteboard or even explain on these tables, because you can easily understand. I assume that you understand the same. I was trying to find that table before I go to that, but you know that the key value pair, which I explained, whenever you create a virtual machine, the tags comes in the keys and values. So key and value. So key value pair. So basically called pair. So it comes in a key value pair. For example, as I said again, in the virtual machine scenario, that whenever you want to create any virtual machine or application, you have to add the tags. And tags is very important. Even if you create a database, the tags is very important. You see, even if you create a database, tags are important. That comes in the key value pair. So whether you create a virtual machine or database, the tags is equally important, because that's how you, um, in a troubleshooting scenario, you understand what the even department. Sometimes people say if SQL server is unavailable, call X department, and this is the number. So number maybe comes in a value. So you don't even need to look at what is the Excel sheet I put my numbers. I just go to the tag and just look at the information. So and you there is no limit. You can configure the tags. You can put hundreds of tags against the same SQL server. So that's the beauty. And but that, of course, that storing that particular tags, you need some storage option, which is called table, Azure table. And Azure table is only used for that. So for example, another example, if you look at there are multiple employees, there are multiple departments, etc. I want to know, hey, this employee, let's say Inesa, works in the department of manufacturing, but I want to know who she reports to. She reports to Sarah. Sarah work with head of department, was a work on head of department, but she also has a relation because other people also report to her, or maybe she report to someone. All that information you can parallelly save into the related to Sarah into the same key value pair that comes in a table, right? So there are multiple use cases you can build with the table. Depends whether this is employee related stuff or that application is utilized, and then you want to see like, hey, I want to see the hierarchy, and that hierarchy is configured into the Azure table. Yeah, files is very important, and I think I covered via the whiteboard. File is based on the network. Network is what? There's a file share which you create. That file share, you anyone can access over the internet. Sorry, within the network, in the same network. So let's assume that you are sitting in AC Patil College of Engineering, and there are 5 floors, just an example. And the file is so big, you cannot basically send over the internet, nor you can send over the WhatsApp, just an example. Of course, WhatsApp is not the way, because as I said, that's not secure way to send, because anyone can forward, and your file will be read by anyone. Maybe your competition college can also read that sensitive information. But you want to keep, you don't want to go like a hard disk from first floor to the fifth floor. Or maybe you're not in college, you want to remotely log into your college environment with VPN, and then you automatically land to the AC Patel College of Engineering environment where the IP into the same range and other departmental floors. You want to keep that copy. What you do, you put basically first you map a common folder, and in that folder you put a file. Of course, that file can also add some permission, like a user. Amar, I'm putting, let's say, the principal sit on the fifth floor and the department is on the first floor. You are adding as a HOD file to that folder, and you said, hey, this file should be only read by principal. So you put a permission on that file and add a person to have the access to. So that file level permission is also a possibility that you can put who should ask access to. Even you can, there's a possibility you can add the time stamps where, or time restriction where this file can be only accessed during this time, or maybe accessed for a month, and after that it should not have an access to. But that configuration you can put into the intra AD where the users created time-based access control. Um, so as I said, even either you can have your own file share in the same region and another file share in another region, and then you synchronize. Um, and that synchronize will happen, as I said, in a different fashion, because if you look at here, first you have the Azure files, but assume that if the region is outage, I want that file to be stored somewhere else, like sort of a geo LRS, but that is this is the file structure, not the local data. But you can do that fashion also. Keep the copy in a synchronous or asynchronous way into another region. Sometimes two region can have one common file share, because I said cost is my issue. I don't want to, even if I can wait. If the Europe data center is failed, I can still wait. So if that is the case, then you can use one file, common file store with the different regions, and you can access it. Because if you look at uh, big organizations, they're not. And let's say if the head of department person is sitting in America, and he also the boss of people in Europe and US, because he has a global responsibility. He's not going to create multiple file shares in every region where you are residing. What he does is just create a file share on his own location and give access to multiple regions and people who's into that region. That can be another scenario, right? Sorry, it's cold here. So the file share, as I think I shared with you, like the file share when you create, that also has a tiers. Because as I said, blob also has tier like hot, cool, and transaction. In file, there is no archived. It is only hot and cool. Sorry, hot, cool, and transaction. And basically, this transaction optimize is used for file storage or any backend storage if you really want to. And as I said, the hot stereo, like it offers general purpose sharing. If there are team shares or file sync, you want to do that. For example, this hot file sync, if you look at this one, this example is a file sync actually, because this file is syncing on the other side. So that is where the hot tier has been utilized. When you're configuring two different regions, you have to choose hot. But by default, it is choose transaction optimize, which is generally any sort of file storage or backend storage. Because if you look at, as I showed you into the portal, if you go to the file share, and if you create a file share, you give the name, you have transaction, which you see heavy transaction heavy workloads and don't need premium and latency, and that requires file storage and backend storage. Great for application. But hot is the same thing, right? The scenario for file share or file sync. This one I copied actually and put it here for your information. But that is how it works. Cool. Obviously, if you want to archive anything from hot to the cool is the next tier, because whatever the next tier you push it to that one. As I told you, like this life cycle will only work like this. When you have hot and you really don't want the data, once you read write and really want, you push to the next tier. Once once you see that you want to access that data 30 days, and if you accessed that data, you can push to the archive level. So basically you push data at the end to the archive level, and you keep it there minimum 7 years to the bank. The same thing for the file also, because if the hot data or transaction data you start pushing back to the cool tier, which is the next, there is no archival. So basically the whatever the new, because you want to save the cost at the end of the day, and the retrieval is happening once in a month. uh, so why should I have to pay more cost? Back to file waste. File is done. Disk, as I said, disk is mainly used for local, basically, right? If you want to put a virtual machine data, you put in the immediate disk. And disk, obviously, as I said, that has the operating system plus data. So operating system is like 64-bit operating system you can save, or 32-bit operating system you can save, which needs to read write locally. But also, if within that, let's say laptop, obviously laptop has a Windows operating system or Ubuntu or any other. So you in the laptop you also save the operating system, but also you save the data, right? So files and everything is the data. So that is also data disk. So sometimes people also partition the disk, C drive, D drive. So D drive may be a data disk, and C drive is your OS disk. We used to do that in the past. I think I don't need to spend time there. But if you look at there, There are a bunch of things, right? There is managed disk and unmanaged disk. So I don't know whether I put it. Yeah, here if you look at the disk, which comes in two flavor, is managed, unmanaged. See, managed disk is, if you look at virtual machines, the good thing about the managed disk, they are 99.99% available. That means, as I said, there is nothing 100%, but maximum availability is there. It helps to remove standard storage account limit. Generally speaking, there are more than 30 to 40 VMs per storage account, and you can scale up to 1000 VMs actually. That is the reason managed is more popular, because there is also separate storage unit versus a clubbed storage unit is in unmanaged one, which is also a disadvantage. If I have to clearly specify managed disk, and if you look at even diagram and realize yourself, because they're isolated disk versus a complete disk unit, there is 50,000 plus managed disk per subscription you can configure. So if you have one subscription, you can even configure up to 50,000. I think that number will also varies because the quota. So generally, let's assume that it shows 50,000, for example, and you want to exceed that quota, you have to request to the Microsoft that, hey, I'm using managed disk, and I really want 60,000 or additional 10,000 and this to be added into that. Microsoft will help you out with the basically going to the portal and expanding and adding external additional 10,000 disks so that you have 60,000 disks. And those comes in two flavors actually, premium and standard. So I think premium is obviously costly. Standard is by default, and premium means, as I said, it's the same thing like hard disk and SSDs. Premium is costly solution because much faster, but also they comes with a flash. Um, yeah, I mean both manage and unmanaged support for snapshot support. So snapshot means taking a copy, immediate copy. That maybe comes in a full or any incremental. Sorry, full in the managed and non incremental. Sorry, incremental manner here, because whenever you take a copy of VM, the full VM copy, the disk and the data will be stored here. But in the unmanaged, whatever the increments, for example, if you copy something and then something comes later, the incremental data will be added. But in this case here, it is not the case. Like even the incremental data, if there is a scenario like um, I make snapshot every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, full data will be captured. But actually, the disadvantage is if between something goes wrong, you miss the data between last 5 minutes. So some advantages, but also some disadvantages. But again, um, the point is how um, you the disk is unavailable. That possibility might be there. But just to recap on manage and manage these are basically managed by Microsoft Azure, and you don't need any storage account while creating new disk. And since this particular storage account is managed by Microsoft or Azure, you do not have full control over the disk that being created because they manage it. So only you can do is take the full backup and then you're done. But you cannot manage the disk. But in the unmanaged, it is something which requires you to create a storage account in the unmanaged field. You, because it's not Microsoft interference, this is the control of your own. And basically, what happens? This storage is created and owned by you because you have the full control over that data. So there are pros and cons, but then you need to look at like, hey, really do I need to manage my disk because I have thousands or millions of disks and I do not have time and resources to use that. Rather, let I put additional money for Microsoft and they manage it. What is mattered for me is the data, right? And that is really critical to me, and that is where I want to spend time. and those other things are taken into account. Now, when I say disk comes with, as I said, this need to be encrypted, because even some hacker comes on the virtual machine and he start reading your local data. That data needs to be encrypted locally, or maybe locally or over the internet, because you have the VPN connectivity there. Let me draw a drawing so that you can easily first understand, and then I go to walk you through the slides. Um, if you look at, let's assume that this is my Azure environment, and this is my VM where my disk is attached. So basically, I'm putting the data locally, and I have another data center which is my own data center on premise, my DC, and in between there is a VPN connectivity, which is encrypted connectivity. So there are two terms actually. When data is encrypted within Azure, that is called encryption at rest. Encryption at rest. And when the data outside the Azure environment, but connecting to two important data centers, maybe your customer data center, maybe you have another data center which is not your data center, but you rented some data center from a hosting company, and there is also another VPN or any sort of connectivity. So you, even if there is a not VPN, but you have direct connect, but again you run on top of direct connect a VPN, because over the DC you can connect VPN, then only traffic will be encrypted. This this is called encryption at transit, because it transiting your traffic from one end to another. So that's the point, is data encryption at rest, encryption in transit, that means outside the Azure environment going to the data center, and encryption at rest, which is within your data center. And that comes like two flavors, like um, Azure storage service encryption and disk encryption. So now, if I say Azure storage encryption and disk encryption, which stays so many things, because the disk encryption is a vast and complex topic. No matter how much you try to make it easy, it turns into more complex subject actually, because encryption is a part of security, and encryption is a very close to heart for surely the teams in any organization, which they said, hey, I'm a security folks, or I'm a chief security officer, or I'm a CISO, virtual CISO, whatever, because they really understand the security in and out, how the encryption works, how the hashing algorithm works, how I need to take pre-shared in account so that both parties knows the common key, and once that common key is been basically known to each other, then only I can set up a VPN tunnel, etc., etc. So encryption, as I said, is very important parameter, and it is very important when you say I have the encryption at rest within data center and encryption in transit. For Azure VM, when you we talk about encryption, it is mainly applicable to encryption at rest. The data stored in Azure VM disk should be encrypted in the major requirement of organization, because I don't want that my data pushed to the disk and that is not encrypted, so that if tomorrow people copy my disk data, they can read it easily, right? And then that's not good, right? Because my data is very sensitive, and only people who really wanted to read, they only should read. So apart from other requirement, there might be couple of requirement comes, right? I want to use my secret keys for encryption. People say, hey, as I told you, there are Microsoft managed keys and your own managed keys to encrypt that data. But then, um, you really start asking question. I want, sorry, gathering requirement from the customer. Customer says, hey, I want to use my secret keys for encryption. Some customer said, when I back up my VM, the backup should be also encrypted. So many requirements. Maybe another customer might say, when I store a VM from a backup, sorry, restore a VM from a backup, it should be encrypted also. That means when you keep the backup, you need to encrypt it, and you want to restore because something goes wrong, and I want to take that backup as a part of rebuilding stuff. That needs to be encrypted. So that means bidirectional encryption. Some customer might say, when I perform a DR replication, you, as I said, there are geo redundancies, like the replication between two different regions. When I perform DR replication for VM, it should be encrypted. Means so many requirement, and maybe you never know. Some customers say, hey, you know what, my VM stored data should not be readable unless decryption keys has been provided. That means you also have to provide the private keys, which is needs to be used for decryption. As I told you in the first day, there's a public key, there's a private key. Publicly over the internet, when you come, you need to use public key. When you are decrypting the other side over the VPN or over the internet, you have to have the private keys for decryption. So n number of requirements up, and you need to know that what is the difference between Azure managed disk or server encryptions, server side encryptions, and maybe Azure disk encryption, and when to use what. So there are so many things, right? And it goes hand in hand in a different scenario, because you never know. Customer might ask few things when there is something goes wrong, and they might put you in a bad situation. Why you are not created encryption? Why you are not putting server side encryption, which is by default offering from major cloud providers? You did not choose that option, even if there was default. Because that challenges after something goes wrong, only you have to face it. Till everything goes well, nobody comes to you. But if something burning happens, then your mistakes will be taken into account. Okay, now I think what time is it now? Let me check. 7:36. We have 20 minutes left for this session. Any question before I go to another topic?
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, ma'am.
So that disk storage just now which you showed in that architecture, that there's an encryption we can take. But is this how is this encryption? Could you show one sample on the Azure environment how the encryption is being done for the disk? And is there any the encryption is for the entire disk? So the encryption is like whatever we are encrypting as an owner of that particular thing. So are we maintaining some primary key or secondary key encryption techniques or some other ways and means of encryption? How exactly is this
Yeah,
being done in the Azure environment?
no, that's a great question. Actually, there is a scenario I'm going to cover this afternoon. So please, if you bear with me for a couple of hours, I will show you exactly your question. Because if I touch now the important topic which I want to cover on consistency, that will I can show, but again it will take time. It's better I'm going to
Okay.
show
No
the
problem,
lab.
sir. No problem, sir.
That will
Later
that
on.
will answer your question. Don't worry. Don't worry. Because as I told you yesterday also, and I think a couple of days back, there are two type of keys. One is Microsoft managed keys and customer managed keys. Why we really need, even if there is a disk to be encrypted with keys, we allow Microsoft to manage it because they know exactly how to store and how to retrieve in necessary time. Versus if the engineer is out of the organization, or um, he's left for any sort, something happens to him, and you do not, you basically want to retrieve some data and you do not have the keys, you're in trouble. But I'll walk you through this afternoon, because if you look at the agenda itself for the day three, I'm almost covered the second part. That's the reason I want to walk you through later the part of. let's put that building some file store or building some
No
storage
problem, sir.
account, and during
Oh,
that time you will see that. So your question will be answered. That's my guarantee. So maybe
okay,
I'll
sir.
put as an action 3 here that MMS or customer manage is uh, and your request has been taken. And madam, yesterday I have spoken with Coach madam that she really wants step by step how to configure stuff, because you can imagine there are so many slides I'm preparing day in day out, and it takes time also for me apart from my job. If you look at, I have made slide up to today, and after this evening, I'll be preparing slide for tomorrow. So once this session is over, I'll prepare some step how to configure few things, and with that, you can go back later and configure a virtual machine. I'll put some recommendations there saying that, hey, if you want to configure this and this setting, what is the cost implication or what is the impact is going to happen. So you will get sort of a detailed analysis, but I do not have that much of time right now apart from my work to create that step by step. But I will make sure I'll create it maybe during the weekend or something. But I'm taking your request and make sure I'll work it out for you. Okay, so there was a concept called consistency models, right? If you look at here, protocols and consistency model, I really want to touch that now. But if you look at understanding the consistent model, that consistent model is, if you look at in Azure, mainly used for Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB is NoSQL database, which is enormously scaled. And if you look at Cosmos DB, as you said, in this, I put some of the use cases when you are running AI based things or in IoT or some booking things, booking management. If you look at booking.com or Airbnb, who has huge amount of data, but that data should be in synchronous, asynchronous, continuously, or in consistency. That is where the Cosmos DB database is being used. So there are multiple scenarios where you can consider the Cosmos DB, but what is the consistent model? You really need to understand. So as we have seen, right, when probably you have went to the SQL database or relational database theory, there is a framework called ACID, which is atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. That ACID is present only for the SQL. When it comes to the NoSQL, basically that is not applicable. So even that C from the ACID, which is a consistency, is not applicable in a Cosmos DB or in NoSQL. So how you really need to know like what is consistency and how that happens within Azure environment. So if you look at um, the consistency, for example, I took a picture that can explain. So let's assume that you have Cosmos DBs placed all over different part of the world, maybe like in the Asia Pac, the North America. Of course, I mean everything is USA, but this is East Coast, West Coast, and then you really need to have some data to be synchronized, but also in data needs to be because this is distributed database, right? Because they're distributed across the globe. Distributed database means they're distributed across different part of the world. The important parameter is whatever data you are putting, it should be in the uniform fashion, and that uniformity is needs to be achieved. That's the reason consistency model is pretty important because it guarantees you the three flavors. The availability, because if one fails, you still have the uniformity of the same data available in other regions. They try to see how we can minimize the latency. But of course, in a failure scenario, there will be latency issue because if the user sitting here and the data replicated one from here, one to here, and one to here, and they want to reach us to the closest one, there is a sort of effect. But the consistency model with the help of Azure They try to give you low latency because they want to reroute the traffic in a different regions or different fibers basically, which is the shortest, because there are some fibers which are also directly connected, but there are some fibers which goes from different regions with multiple hops, and they guarantee you that the availability is there but also latency can be achieved. And throughput means the performance. They make sure that you get the performance which you really need to have it. uh, Sorry. So if you look at the consistent model, there are five flavors. If you want to configure, maybe I'll show you later. If you want to configure, it comes with the five flavors: the strong, the bounded stainless, the session, the custom prefix, and eventual. The strong means is the strong, and the other side is a weak. If you look at the partition here, it states that this side is the strongest and that side is weaker. What does that mean is, if you look at here, strongest means everything is synchronous. Because if you are, let's say if there's a multiple regions, maybe you have seen that from the drawing, just an example that there are multiple regions here, there are multiple cosmos dbs. If you look at the strong, which is synchronous, if you keep the data here, is basically exactly same copies will be synchronized automatically to other regions, whichever it is configured. So there is nothing like one the, let's say you put the purple and purple is not available on the other side, it is automatically replicated and sequentially added to the other side if the user wants to be closer and wants to achieve the low latency. But if you look at of course, just put for your knowledge that it comes in different scenarios where application can't tolerate any data loss, because if the data loss here, you want that same data to be available and fetched by from the other region, but the same data you really want it to proceed. So organization cannot lose the data. That's the reason they have to use strong synchronous replication. But again, it comes with a cost, but the gives more guarantee about latency, throughput, and availability. If you look at bounded stateless, I'm choosing two because they're part of the strong. Weak is not important. So if you look at bounded stateless, it's asynchronous. That means if you put red, it stays basically it copies to the next one, but not all the places, right? The same goes to here also, right? If you copy here, it copy to another, but not every places, asynchronously. And just to focus, as I said, this part is strong consistent and weak consistency. The the more stronger consistency go, the higher latency and lower throughput added. But if you look at the weaker one, where the weak consistency means low latency, high throughput. But sometimes customer use, depends on their scenario, they use both the one. The more eventual is popular if they really want high throughput to be achieved. But majority strongly, the throughput is okay, but I want my data should be replicated everywhere synchronously. So that is where those scenarios are considered. That was the last slide. By the way, I have to drop a little bit early because 8 o'clock I have call. That's the reason I'm making this short today. But I have covered all the part which is supposed to be there. Any question before next 13 minutes? Ma'am, I'll come back to you on your managed and unmanaged encryption disk. Question was looked
Yes, sir.
but any other question on the storage? Hope I'm clear on what storage is and what are the other parameter, sorry, storage options you can choose. You will get the slide by the end of the day, every slide which is presented here. Any question? By the way, I still have 12 minutes. Maybe I can do one thing as a part of addition. Um, Ma'am, we can connect. Sorry, can I go another 10 minutes? Should be okay. I will drop 1 minute to the 8 o'clock because I have the call with customer. Uh, okay, let me quickly draw. So there are two concepts I want to add it here. The one is data warehouse, the generally called W DHW. Sorry, DWH. Sorry, it's my wrong. And then there is another concept called data lake. And these two are heavily utilized in data analytics nowadays. But it's important for you to understand because since it is part of the storage only, let me push the bit up. Can you see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
So, so data warehouse and data lake. So if you look at data warehouse, generally, let me give you the example warehouse. Anyone really want to answer what is warehouse is? Just open your unmute yourself and answer. What is warehouse? Any guess? Any general thought? Okay, let me do that. So I'm sure you go to the mall in the weekend for sure. Yeah, the malls have every mall has bunch of shops here and there. If you look at there are hundreds of mall in Mumbai right now, maybe small, medium, large, whatever. But majority of the malls they have like lifestyle, they have shopper stops, etc., etc. Right? There are a bunch of shops. Maybe it's the same lifestyle and the shopper stop, etc. Let's assume that these shops obviously they have the clothes and some other stuff they are selling it. Let's assume that there is a Black Friday or Diwali or big functions are coming, and I see that hey, this polo shirt, I'm getting a lot of demands, and there are 100 customers came and said, "Sir, I want polo shirt with this size," but that is not available into your shop. So they cannot just go from let's say VT station or CST station to the Thane station. It's a long distance. What they do generally, they have the warehouses in between, very close to the shops where the region wise, and there are stock. Everything is in the stock. So what they request, they call, hey, we have customers. They can offer a coffee for 10-15 minutes, and they say, can you take this polo medium sized 100 t-shirt? They just drive back to you. So that means there is a warehouse which has a lot of storage of all sort of material which you are selling in the shop. I hope that is clear to you. So that is the same fundamental. So you create if you have multiple data locations and you take the put the every data into the warehouse and wherever you need it, you take into account. So what happens? The data warehouse, of course, it is complicated, costly, and hard to make changes because costly in the sense you have to put everything in the data into that warehouse, everything. That means the shipping needs to happen, plus shipping both side. First, you ship it when there is a needed. You ask him to reship it. The oil, the sorry gas, uh, the person who's working, they have to go from floors from one to. So the time costs money. Plus, basically there is in terms of data. Now I'm talking in terms of data. The data access over the data warehouse. There is a schema on right, and generally the consumers which are business professional guys, they are the who are the consumers of that particular data warehouse is the business professionals. But if you look at let me compare one by one, otherwise you will be losing later that. So the data warehouse which you understand, it is complicated, costly, but hard to make changes. But if you look at data lake, which is the same sort of, but it is accessible very easily, It is less costly but easy to make changes. In data warehouse, there is less possibility you make changes that easily. Warehouse, what happens is if you talk about data access level, you have a schema on writing mode. That means you are writing more than reading. But in the data lake, there are more schema on reading, right? If I'm going through the in data house, data lake is the same, but like I said, there are some improvements in data lake. Now data lake is more popular. Data warehouse might be like Hadoop, for example. If you might have heard, Hadoop is one of the data warehouse solution. But if you look at the structured in terms of data warehouse, is managed and relational structure, because that's the reason I said it's a schema. But in case of data lake, it can be the data structure can be non-relational or maybe raw sort of data. Um, if I have to talk, especially from a security point of view, the security is more mature on both sides, because this data lake is an improvement of data warehouse. They have considered more security aspect than the data warehouse, but both are mature on their level. Data warehouse mainly use for SQL, because access method is SQL for data warehouse, and this one is no SQL. That's the only difference, and the major difference I would say that people are still using data warehouse because there is structured, because there is a schema on write, but in the schema on read, because they really need to read more unstructured, non-SQL data, which can be semi-structured also sometimes. The advantage of data warehouse is easily horizontally scalable. That means you can create the warehouse horizontally, means replicate to any part of the region. That is not the case into data lake. Data lake is the same like vertical scaling, which I said. You have the building, 3 floor, you can add additional 2 floor, you add the capacity only into the existing one, but you cannot scale it horizontally like auto scaling group. The copies will not be easily taken into account. So those are the differences, and this is I thought let's check be 10 minutes. But database or data lakes are very important parameter when you go data analytics. Uh, maybe in the future we can have specific data analytics discussion as a different presentation, and I'll go deeper about how the data analytics, what are the different tools can be taken into account, how that data ingestion, data storage, and how you can create different models and dashboards. You can do that. We can cover that later actually. I hope this data warehouse and data lake is clear. Just keep in mind that this is SQL, which is relational, this is non-relational, and this comes on the writing versus reading. These are the two important things you need to keep in account.
Listen, one small question on this data lake. Is this data lake available for AWS and Azure both?
Yeah. Everybody has their data warehouse solution, right?
No, the entire
And
architecture of the warehouse, the way you said. Now, for example, data lake, there is no SQL. Like we are doing it on AWS, the CloudWatch or the MongoDB. We are using that for a purpose. The way this procedure is, the entire technology architecture of warehouse is there. Is it applicable for Azure and AWS, both the environments? Data lake.
yeah. I say nowadays what happens, Azure and AWS they have it. But if you look at, there is a company called Databricks. Probably you have heard that. That is more widely used solution by both the companies, and there is integration. If you go to Databricks, this company they have more AI, data and AI combined. If you look at here, and they have offer even data lake solution more easily, because they, so look at this. And why I'm telling this integration is there into Azure also. If you go to the marketplace, just to showcase, I have 1 more minute. Marketplace and Databricks, see Databricks. So Databricks is there in Azure. The same Databricks is also available in AWS. So that those kind of solutions you can always take into account, right? Because as I said, cloud cannot generate anything. There are small startups also part of the ecosystem of data, because if you go to Databricks, they have integration with solutions with sorry, partnership with the resources. There might be somewhere they have the partner here, AWS, Azure, GCP. You will see that here somewhere on the website, but not necessarily you have to see on the website. If you see here itself, if you go to the marketplace in AWS, if you are next to this console, you will see that the AWS Databricks is also available there. Yeah,
Yes.
no problem. Okay, then I have to drop because I have the customer call in a minute. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you this afternoon. Bye bye.
Participants' attendance link is shared in a meeting.